This book, Peyote, History, Tradition, Politics, and Conservation, is a book that I just published a few months ago, together with my co-editor, Clancy Clavnar, who I thank and acknowledge. Clancy is an incredible editor and also drew this painting, especially for the cover. She's an artist as well. And, you know, I'm just going to give a few ideas of what the book addresses, but as a pretext to actually talking about peyote and what I consider the main challenges and topics involving this substance. So the book came out by Praeger. It's the same publisher that published the book by Tom Roberts and Michael Wilkman, Psychedelic Medicines, which I consider a great reference on this area. And the literature on peyote is very small, and what happens basically is that there are some classics and all these guys are dead. And other than that, there's a few published books scattered, but not a much actually. There's not a very comprehensive look on peyote, and this book tries to fill in this gap, because there are some ethnographies on like traditional drug use by the Huichols or Tarahumara, Tepehuan, Cora. There's some on the Native American church. There's some on literature on religious and legal battles regarding peyote. Our book tried to talk about the field of peyote as a whole. So I think that the great merit of this book is trying to make a kind of dialogue between, on the one side, anthropology and the idea of traditional drug use, cultural symbolism, history. On the other side, the legal discussions, everything that has to do with regulation, and finally, the environmental, conservationist, biological dimension of the discussion. And this is central. Peyote incorporates this crossroads of topics. Why? Well, as we have seen here, peyote has a large history, mescaline being this first synthesized substance. Peyote has archaeological evidence of use of at least 5,000 or 6,000 years, so it's one of the most ancient references that we have of psychedelic use. Peyote has been used in a multiple various contexts, so it has a strong presence in traditional indigenous settings. It had a strong presence in the psychedelic movement, as we have seen with the lecture of our colleague just now. It has a strong use in folk culture. So if you go today to any market in Mexico, anywhere, you just can buy pomadas de peyote, ointments of peyote that are used as topic applications for severe pain issues related to arthritis, to muscle strengthening, and other uses. And peyote was central in establishing religious freedom in the US. So peyote was through the cause of peyote that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was championed in the US, opening perhaps one of the most traditional and important rights of us as Westerners, which is the right to religious freedom. So peyote has multiple dimensions and penetrations into our lives. In Mexico particularly, it's used, peyote is part of the larger cacti family. The cactus are natives to Mexico and northern Mexico and southern Texas. And cactus are completely present in people's life in every dimension. They can be used as jelly, they can be used to build fences, they can be used as food for donkeys, they can be used as alcohol beverages, they can be used as tonics, they can be used as revitalization. I particularly suffered from an overdose of nopal while I was living in the semi-desert. You're supposed to laugh at my joke, because I am vegetarian, and so they gave me a lot of nopal, which is a kind of cactus. I was living in the semi-desert, and they use nopal almost every day for all kinds of things. Everybody has a tip of what nopal is good for, so I say I overdosed on nopal, which is very strong taste and feeling. So peyote has this central presence in multiple aspects of culture. What is the main, so it's not only indigenous, it's also very strong in for mestizo uses, in folk uses in Mexico. What are the main topics or debates that have to do with the use of peyote? And here, as I said, I'm just going to mention, like it's like an appetizer for you to maybe read the book. If you can't afford the book and you want to read some chapter and it's for only personal use or scientific use, please feel free to contact me and I'll help you have access to it. I want to mention here two aspects which I consider important in general about peyote. I would say that the topic of peyote involves two main sets of paradoxes, or what in English people call a catch-22. The first catch-22 about peyote is one that is not just, it has not to do just with peyote, but psychedelics in general, which is the classifications of psychedelics as a Schedule I substance. The definition of a Schedule I substance is that it has no medical use and it has a potential of abuse. So the very founding definition of peyote excludes the recognition, or other psychedelics, that it has potential therapeutic uses. And that is a big irony, because to eventually change the scheduling, you would need to have scientific research that shows that the substances have therapeutic potentials. However, you can't really study these substances because they are scheduled. So it's a big vicious cycle that sort of sets on the beginning the very limitation for the topic. And of course, this, you know, there is this, the paradox with psychedelics is that it is not considered enough of a social problem, or enough of a political, social problem and relevant debate. Amanda Fielding, who I see right there in the back, has written about this in our book, that the paradox that these psychedelics are not considered enough of a social question in order to be discussed publicly in terms of rescheduling. I have felt that very much while living in Mexico, working on a drug policy program, and the discussion on peyote was not considered legitimate for my job, because in Mexico you have such a great drama regarding the drug war and violence, narco-trafficking, and all that, and psychedelics are not in the public radar on this regard. So that's one of the founding paradoxes to address the topic of peyote. It's not even considered such a relevant, important thing in Mexico, which is a society that was funded by multiple indigenous groups that use traditionally a series of substances. Mexico is, according to Schultes in his classic book from the 70s, well, that published in the 70s, that has the largest fauna and flora of, I don't know, you understand me, of psychedelics on Earth. However, there is so little research about it. It's not considered a social topic. It's not considered important. There is no institutional support. And there's multiple contradictions on this level of scheduling. One of them is that the National Indian Health Service in the US recognizes the use of peyote as a medicine in Navajo lands for treating drug-related problems and alcohol-related problems. However, it stays still scheduled, what limits research and limits the discussion on changing this, its classification. The other paradox is the environmental dimension, and this will be my last point on this short overview. Peyote is a fragile cactus. It's a rare species. It's indigenous of northern Mexico and southern Texas. So peyote takes many, many years to grow, and it just grows in this area of the world. Actually, it's a very resilient substance. One of the articles talked about how peyote survived as a species in the glaciation periods of Earth. So it has a long history as a species itself. And the exercise for us is to move our anthropocentric view on peyote and think of, if we could, of peyote, how would peyote see the world, and how did how peyotes come about on Earth. And from the point of view of peyote, if we take a more conservationist, conservative view, we are the largest predators of peyote. We, human beings, what perhaps the Pachamama lovers call a sacrament, or other people would be enthusiastic about its potentials, we are actually predators to peyote. Peyote defends itself by its strong, horrible bitterness. It doesn't really have many natural predators. Man is a natural predator of peyote. And so there is a huge ecological problem. The natural populations are in total decline. In a mathematical basis, we just have more mouths wanting to eat peyote than peyote can regenerate itself. So this creates a big challenge in terms of conservation. And what is the catch-22? What is the paradox? The paradox is, well, it is listed both in Mexican legislation, US legislation, and international legislation. They have like a continuum of classification for the substances, like vulnerable, liable to become endangered, extinct. There's some variation on each of the legislation. Some place it in a more harder. It's not, definitely not on the end of the continuum, like the publisher wanted to change the title for History, Tradition, Politics, and Extinction. I said no. I know it would sell better, but it's not really on the verge of extinction. It's not yet endangered to this level, but there is a huge problem. And so what is the problem? The problem is that it's a cactus that is rare. It takes many years to grow, and we have more people eating than peyote available. However, we cannot cultivate peyote because peyote is illegal. So this is a completely schizophrenic situation. And in this regard, peyote is an example, a laboratory, a good paradigm for us to think not only of the, incredible, amazing, psychedelic, visionary, therapeutic effects that these plants give us, but our responsibility as humans in co-leading the survival of species, which is the conservation environmental discussion is usually kind of invisible in the psychedelic arena, and everybody's talking as if these resources were available there forever, or let's just synthesize the substance. But it's not just about our feelings about them, but it's about their right as a species. And this involves highly complex legal and cultural problems, because not only you cannot plant peyote, you cannot cultivate, but also from traditional perspectives, it's not necessarily the best solution. For example, the Huichol people, they do what they call a ritual gather of peyote. So they used to walk five, four days to the desert, Virikuta, the ancestral, cosmological founding point of their society, of their mythology, and do what they call the peyote gather, the peyote hunt. Peyote is associated to the deer, and finding the peyote is like hunting a deer. So it would be kind of weird from a Huichol perspective that you have a garden of peyote. That's one problem. The other problem is that for the Native Americans in the US, some branches are against cultivation as well, either because they don't have experience, or the experience they have, they failed and did not go very well because maybe they overwatered. It's not there culturally, the idea that you should cultivate, although newer generations and more recent discussions have involved the idea of cultivating greenhouses or in the wild. I'm just coming right here before this trip for a little field work trip in South Texas, and found this very depressive scene, which is the scene of the dealers. You have only 3 licensed dealers that sell peyote in the US. In this region of South Texas. To proper harvest, you have to be down on your knee and cut it maybe towards near the ground. That's a lot of work. And so peyote takes maybe 4 or 5 years to regrow. How can we educate these populations to harvest it properly? Or even culturally, it's complicated. If traditional populations want to get the whole root out, how can you tell Indians not to get the whole root out? because this system is available for small-scale societies, but not for the picture that we have today, which is more people eating peyote than before. So the book tries to address the complex matters between legality. The discussion of tradition is important, and with this I'll finish, because, for example, in Mexico, you can only have traditional populations using peyote. How do you define exactly which traditional populations is complicated? The most famous are these 4 ones, Huichol, Cora, Tepehuan, Tarahumara. But of course, Mexico is hardly, very indigenous and mixed. The problem of tradition in the US and in Mexico is this idea of exemption to traditional use. The exemption is that only religious, indigenous use is allowed. Therefore, people like us are outruled and criminalized. So it's not only a problem of authenticity per se, is this authentic or not? But the problem is, if you're not considered traditional, then you're criminalized, and then you would end up in jail. So the crossing between the discussions of tradition and legality is important, because it's not just about, is this shaman real or not, but it's about how do we, if it's a limited resource, how do we define who have access, and how do you define what is indigenous and what is non-indigenous? Where do you draw the lines, and what kind of regulation do we want? Perhaps a mixed regulation where some traditional people would get it in the wild and other people would have to cultivate it. Those are many questions to come. I offer you to study our book, and I'm open for more debate. Thank you.